It was still dark when I heard something scratching at my front door. My first thought was a bear, but the sound was too delicate, too careful, like someone trying not to be noticed but needing help badly. I stood there, holding my breath, listening to those desperate little claws tapping against the wood. A week ago, I saw her for the first time. That starving snow leopard showed up out of nowhere, soaked and shaking from the freezing rain. She sat under the porch roof, staring at me with those huge pale eyes, her ribs showing under wet fur. I threw her some leftover deer meat that day, not thinking she would ever come back. But now, hearing that scratching, I felt my heart thumping so loud I thought it might scare her away. Slowly, I reached for the curtain and peeked outside. My porch light was still on. There she was again. Her fur looked drier now, but she seemed thinner than before. And beside her, under her massive chest, were 3 tiny cubs huddled together, shivering from the cold spring night. I felt something tighten in my chest so hard it almost hurt. She looked up at me with eyes that said everything: fear, hope, exhaustion, trust. As if she remembered the man who threw her meat a week ago and decided to risk everything to bring her babies here. The smallest cub was struggling to stand, its back legs wobbling, tiny tail flicking weakly. I didn't know what to do. Part of me screamed, "Don't open that door. They're wild. Dangerous." Another part whispered, "She came to you. For them." I turned away and paced in the kitchen, running my hands through my hair, feeling my heart pound in my throat. What if she lunged at me the moment I stepped outside? What if the cubs had some sickness I could catch? But when I glanced back at them, their tiny shapes pressed against their mother's chest, my fear melted into something else. A trembling responsibility. I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around my shoulders before I cracked open the door just an inch. The cold mountain air rushed in, making me shiver. She didn't move. She just watched me, breathing heavily, as if each breath hurt her ribs. "Hey girl," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You came back. You brought them." She blinked slowly, her head dropping lower as if she was bowing in exhaustion. One of the cubs let out a tiny squeak, so soft it sounded like a kitten. My heart broke right there. I stepped outside fully, the icy stone biting my bare feet. The porch light flickered above me. The mother tensed but didn't growl. I saw her ribs move with each desperate breath. She looked so tired I could almost hear her bones creaking. "It's okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you." The smallest cub lost balance and fell sideways onto the stone step. It didn't move for a moment. I panicked inside, wanting to run and scoop it up, but I forced myself to stay still. The mother nosed it gently, pushing it back up to sit, but its head drooped forward. Its eyes were half closed. That was the moment I realized why she brought them here. Not because she trusted me, not because she wanted my help, but because she had nowhere else to go. I stood there, freezing, staring into those pale eyes filled with something so human it scared me. She was begging me without a sound. I took a slow step back into the house, not wanting to spook her, and grabbed the leftover venison I had in the fridge. It was only a few pieces, but it was better than nothing. My hands were trembling so bad the meat fell onto the kitchen floor. I picked it up and went back to the door. When I stepped onto the porch again, she raised her head, eyes locked on the meat. The cubs perked up, sniffing the air. I tossed one piece toward her paws. She didn't move at first, only stared at me, making sure it wasn't a trap. Then she lowered her head and tore into the meat with a quiet growl. The cubs scrambled to get a piece too, their tiny teeth barely making marks in the frozen flesh. Watching them, I felt my chest tighten again with something I hadn't felt in years. Not pity, not fear, but a deep, gnawing ache to protect them, even if it made no sense. I stood there in the cold morning air, heart pounding, as the sun began to rise behind the pines. The mother ate quickly, then looked back up at me, licking her lips, her eyes half closed in exhaustion. She nudged the smallest cub closer to her belly, wrapping her huge paw around it to keep it warm. For a brief moment, she looked at me with an expression I will never forget. A silent thank you, mixed with a silent question, and I didn't have an answer for her. That was the moment I realized my life would never be the same after today. The morning light spilled across my porch, revealing every detail of her and the cubs. I sat inside, peeking through the curtains for what felt like hours, trying to calm my racing heart. Finally, I forced myself to open the door again. The cold mountain air slapped my face awake. She watched me, ears flicking back, tail twitching with each step I took closer. The cubs shrank against her, tiny squeaks escaping them. I crouched down a few feet away, careful not to meet her eyes directly. I remembered reading somewhere that direct eye contact could be seen as a threat. "Hey, it's okay," I whispered. I'm just trying to help." The smallest cub, the one who almost collapsed earlier, was breathing hard. Its sides puffed out with each shallow gasp. It lifted its head weakly and blinked at me with unfocused, cloudy blue eyes. Its fur was thin along its belly, and I could see each rib. I swallowed the lump in my throat. She shifted her huge paw forward, almost protectively, then lowered her head and nudged the little one toward me. For a second, I thought my heart stopped. Was she showing me her cub? Trusting me? Or warning me to back off? I stayed still, forcing myself not to move. She nudged it again, and it stumbled forward, tiny claws clicking against the stone step. It tried to let out a squeak, but only managed a raspy cough. That sound alone made something deep inside me ache with helpless anger. I backed up slowly and went inside. My hands shook as I searched the fridge and cupboards. A few slices of chicken, half a pack of beef jerky, nothing enough for a starving leopard family. I grabbed it all anyway. I thought about the little grocery store down the mountain. It was only a 30-minute drive, but the road twisted along cliffs with no guardrails. Last winter, a neighbor's truck slid right off into the ravine. I shivered at the memory. I threw on my boots, grabbed my keys, and glanced back at the window. She was still there, staring at the door, her cubs pressed tight against her belly. For a second, I hesitated. What if they were gone when I came back? What if the smallest one didn't make it another hour? But I had no choice. They needed more than scraps. Driving down the gravel road, I couldn't stop replaying the moment she pushed her cub toward me. I didn't know what it meant. Was she surrendering it? Asking me to take it away from her suffering? Or did she believe I could help it survive? The store was empty when I walked in. A faint radio played country music behind the counter. Dale, the owner, looked up from his crossword. "Morning," he said, squinting at me. "You look like you seen a ghost." Something like that, I muttered, heading straight for the meat fridge. I grabbed chicken thighs, beef stew chunks, even 2 packs of liver. Anything rich in iron. I piled it all onto the counter. Dale raised his eyebrows. "Stocking up for a feast?" "Not exactly." I hesitated, then exhaled. "You ever seen snow leopards around here?" He snorted. "Snow leopards? Closest we got's bobcats and mountain lions." "Why?" I glanced out the window at the bright spring sun rising over the peaks. "Just curious." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Let me tell you something. My uncle worked in Nepal for a few months back in the 80s. Said snow leopards were ghosts of the mountains. Silent. Deadly. One pounced on a man gathering wood near base camp. Crushed his ribs with one swipe." I swallowed hard, feeling sweat drip down my spine despite the morning chill. Dale chuckled, shaking his head. "But hey, we're not in Nepal. Still, if you're seeing big cats around, you best be careful. They might look pretty, but they ain't pets." "Yeah. Thanks," I said, sliding my card through the reader. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. He bagged up the meat and handed it to me. "You take care up there. And if you see one, don't feed it. You'll just make it come back." I didn't answer. On the drive back up, his words spun in my head. Don't feed it. Don't let it come back. But when I pulled into my driveway and saw her still sitting there, cubs pressed against her thin body, I knew it was too late for that. I stepped out of the truck slowly, clutching the bags to my chest. She raised her head, eyes locking onto mine. The cubs squeaked and shuffled closer to her warmth. "Hey girl," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I got you something." I moved to the porch, my boots crunching the gravel. She didn't growl, didn't snarl, just watched me with those pale eyes, flicking her tail once against the stone step. I pulled out a pack of liver and tore it open, tossing a few pieces near her paws. The smell hit the air immediately. She sniffed it, then tore into it with silent desperation. The cubs crawled forward, fighting over the scraps, their tiny growls pitiful and weak. As I sat on the porch step, watching them eat, Dale's story about the man with crushed ribs played in my mind. I knew she could kill me in a second if she wanted to. But when the smallest cub stumbled again and pressed its head against her belly, too weak to chew, I felt tears burn behind my eyes. She looked at me then, and in her gaze, I saw something that had nothing to do with wild instincts. It was the same thing I saw in my mother's eyes when my brother was sick as a baby. A silent, helpless prayer for a miracle. The drive back up the mountain felt longer than usual. Every bump on the gravel road rattled the bags of meat in the passenger seat. My chest tightened each time I pictured the smallest cub lying there, barely breathing. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw her immediately. She hadn't moved from the porch. The cubs were curled up against her belly, but one was sprawled on its side, its back legs limp and tail flicking weakly. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I sat there for a moment, staring at them through the windshield. Fear battled with something deeper, something that burned hot in my chest. I stepped out slowly, feeling the morning air sting my face. The sun was higher now, lighting up the edges of the forest with a golden glow. "Hey girl," I whispered as I approached. Her head snapped up, ears flattening for a moment, then relaxing when she saw the bags. The cubs squeaked, but the smallest one didn't move. I crouched a few feet away, heart hammering so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Carefully, I pulled out strips of beef and chicken, laying them on the stone step. She sniffed the air, her nose twitching. One by one, the cubs crawled forward, except the little one. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. She looked at it, then at me. Her eyes narrowed with something I couldn't read. Anger? Desperation? Trust? I didn't know anymore. "Come on, baby," I whispered to the cub, my throat tightening. "Eat something, please." The mother nudged it gently, but it only let out a weak squeak and flopped sideways. She let out a low, throaty moan, a sound so broken it made my chest ache. She glanced at me again, eyes wide and unblinking. I swallowed hard. I knew what I had to do, but my body refused to move. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away, to let nature take its course. But then I saw its tiny ribs shudder with each gasp, and I couldn't take it anymore. I went back inside, grabbed a loaf of bread, and ripped it into small pieces. Then I pulled out a bowl and poured some warm milk into it, mixing in crushed pieces of liver until it formed a mushy paste. My hands were shaking so bad I spilled half of it on the counter. I didn't care. When I stepped back outside, she stood up suddenly, blocking her cubs with her massive body. Her ears pinned back, and her lips pulled away from her teeth in a silent snarl. "Easy, girl," I whispered, holding the bowl out in front of me. "I'm just trying to help." She growled softly, her tail lashing against the porch. I set the bowl down a few feet away and backed up, keeping my eyes on the ground. The smell of warm milk and liver drifted up between us. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she stepped forward, sniffed the bowl, and nudged it toward the cub. The two stronger cubs tried to push their heads in, but she swatted them away gently, keeping the bowl in front of the weakest one. It lifted its head, nose twitching. Slowly, shakily, it leaned forward and licked at the paste. My breath caught in my chest. It licked again, then again, each movement small and clumsy. Tears blurred my vision, and I wiped them away quickly. "Good job, little one," I whispered. "You can do it." She watched me the whole time, her pale eyes locked onto my face. Each time I moved, her ears flicked back, but she didn't growl again. It was like she was weighing every breath I took, deciding if I was worth the risk. When the cub finished half the bowl, it collapsed onto its side, breathing hard but deeper now. The mother licked its head, her huge tongue almost covering its entire neck. Then she looked up at me again, her eyes softer this time. I felt my knees give out, and I sat down on the cold stone step, shaking all over. My mind raced with questions. What if she attacked me tomorrow? What if the cubs died anyway? What if I was only making things worse by interfering? But when she leaned down and nudged the bowl closer to her other cubs, letting them eat too, I realized none of that mattered right now. She trusted me, at least for today. And as I sat there, the morning sun warming my back and the smell of fresh pine drifting down from the forest, I understood something I'd never felt so deeply before. Sometimes the right choice isn't the safe one. Sometimes it's the one that terrifies you the most, because that's the only choice that means anything at all. The storm hit late that night, tearing through the valley with a rage that shook the walls of my cabin. I barely slept. Each crack of thunder rattled the windows, and the rain slammed against the tin roof like 1,000 stones. I kept thinking about her and the cubs huddled under the porch, exposed to the wind that howled down from the peaks. When dawn finally came, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside into the heavy gray morning. The trees dripped around me, and the air smelled like wet earth and pine sap. She was still there. Her fur was soaked, clinging to her thin frame. The cubs lay against her belly, trembling. The smallest one wasn't moving at all. I felt my chest tighten, so hard it hurt to breathe. She looked up at me with wide, desperate eyes. Her chest heaved with each ragged breath, and for the first time, I saw something like madness flicker across her face. She nosed the little cub over and over, trying to wake it. It let out a soft wheeze, then went limp again. My throat burned as I crouched a few feet away, unsure what to do. She bared her teeth for a moment, a silent snarl, then turned back to the cub and let out a low, broken moan. A sound so hollow it made my eyes sting. I stood and stumbled back inside, grabbed my phone off the kitchen counter, and scrolled through my contacts with shaking fingers. I pressed Jake's name and held the phone to my ear, pacing the living room. He answered after a few rings. "Yeah, Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need your help. There's a snow leopard here. She's got cubs. One of them is dying." Silence on the other end. Then a short, disbelieving laugh. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm serious, Jake. She came here a week ago. Now she's back with 3 cubs. The smallest one. I think it's dying. Please, man. I don't know what to do." He sighed, and I heard him rub his face. "You know I can't do anything about that. It's illegal for me to even touch a wild big cat without authorization. And besides," his voice lowered, "look, man, I get it. You're a good person, but you can't save them. That's nature. They're wild animals. If you interfere, it'll just make things worse." I closed my eyes, fighting back the tears burning behind them. "She's looking at me like I'm her last chance, Jake. I can't just watch it die." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said softly, "Don't do this. Stay inside. Let it happen. That's how it's supposed to be." I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were trembling so badly, I almost dropped the phone. Outside, the rain had picked up again, pattering softly against the porch roof. I grabbed the bowl from yesterday, poured warm milk into it, and mixed in crushed liver and a bit of honey. My chest felt tight with fear as I opened the door. She turned to me immediately, eyes wild and bloodshot. Her fur was matted to her sides, and her whiskers dripped with rain. She growled low in her throat as I stepped closer, her ears pinned flat against her skull. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Please, let me help." She bared her teeth, but her eyes flicked to the bowl. I knelt down and set it just within her reach, then backed away slowly, keeping my gaze on her paws. The 2 stronger cubs crawled forward, but she pushed them aside with a heavy paw, dragging the smallest one closer. Its head flopped limply against her leg. She nudged it toward the bowl, but it didn't move. A broken sound escaped her throat, half snarl, half sob. I swallowed hard. I knew what I had to do. Slowly, so slowly, I reached out and slid the bowl closer to the cub. She lunged forward, her jaws snapping an inch from my wrist. I froze, feeling her hot breath on my skin, but she didn't bite down. She pulled back, her eyes locked on mine with a wild desperation that made my chest ache. "Please," I whispered. "I'm trying to save it." She let out a deep, rattling growl, then turned away and curled around the cub, her huge body shaking. I didn't move. I sat there in the rain, watching as she nudged its tiny mouth toward the bowl. It didn't lick at first. Then, slowly, its tongue flicked out, tasting the milk. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It licked again, then again, each movement weaker than before, but it was something. She watched me the whole time, her eyes full of a pain I couldn't imagine. A mother watching her baby slip away, powerless to stop it. Jake's words echoed in my head. "Let it happen. That's how it's supposed to be." But as I sat there on the cold, wet stone, I knew I could never do that. Not when a life was hanging by a thread I could still hold on to, even if it meant risking everything. The sky was still gray when I found the old baby bottle in the back of my kitchen drawer. It was dusty and smelled like plastic, but it was all I had. My hands shook as I washed it out, filling it with warm milk mixed with crushed liver and a bit of honey. Each second felt like a lifetime. Outside, she lay curled around her cubs, her massive body trembling with each shallow breath. The smallest cub lay limp against her chest, its tiny sides barely moving. As I stepped onto the porch, the wood creaked under my boots. Her head snapped up instantly. She let out a low, guttural growl that rumbled through the morning air. I held up the bottle, my fingers white around it. "Please, Girl, I whispered, my voice breaking. Let me try. She snarled, her teeth flashing white, and for a moment I thought she would lunge. But then she let out a different sound. A long, low moan that rose into a wild, broken cry. The sound tore through me, so raw and desperate it felt like my chest was splitting open. Slowly, I stepped closer, crouching just out of her reach. The other two cubs pressed against her belly, eyes wide and unblinking. The smallest cub didn't move. Its tiny mouth hung open slightly, its breath coming in shallow gasps. I reached out, the bottle trembling in my grip. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. She growled again, a harsh, rattling sound, but didn't strike. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide and glassy with something I couldn't name. Fear, grief, helplessness. I slid forward inch by inch until I was close enough to touch the cub. She let out another broken moan, a sound like sobbing. My fingers closed around the cub's thin body. Its fur was soaked and cold. It didn't even struggle as I pulled it gently into my lap. She roared then, a deep, echoing roar that rattled the porch boards under me. My ears rang with it, and my vision blurred with tears. But she didn't move. She just watched, her massive chest heaving with each breath. I held the bottle to the cub's lips. Nothing happened at first. Its mouth hung open uselessly. Come on, baby, I whispered, tears dripping onto its fur. Please, please don't leave. Finally, its tongue flicked out, touching the milk-soaked nipple. My heart jumped. It licked again, then sucked weakly. The bottle twitched in my hands with each swallow. I let out a sob of relief, pressing my forehead against its tiny head. She roared again, louder this time, her voice breaking into a wild, high-pitched wail that echoed across the valley. A sound of pain so deep it made my bones ache. She slammed her paw down on the porch, claws scratching deep grooves into the wood. But she didn't come closer. She just cried. I fed the cub slowly, feeling its tiny body warm up in my hands. Each swallow was weaker than the last, but it kept drinking. I glanced up at her. Tears blurred my vision, but I could still see her eyes. Wide, broken, silent rivers of rainwater ran down her whiskers as she stared at me. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the cub stopped sucking. Its eyes closed, and it let out a tiny sigh. For a moment, I thought it had died, but then its chest rose and fell with a deeper, steadier rhythm. I placed it gently back against her belly. She leaned down immediately, licking its head with long, rough strokes. Her massive body shook with each breath. She let out one final moan, softer now, almost like a whimper. I backed away slowly, my legs numb. My whole body trembled with adrenaline and fear. When I reached the door, I turned back. She curled around the cub, her head resting on her massive paws. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine one last time. In that look, I saw everything. Fear, relief, grief, gratitude, and a question that cut straight to my soul. Did I do the right thing? I stood there for a long time, watching as the morning light crept across the porch. The cubs pressed against her warmth. The smallest one nestled safely between her paws. For the first time since she arrived, her eyes closed. She let out a long sigh, her entire body sinking against the stone step. I didn't have an answer for her. Maybe I never would. But as I stepped back into my cabin, closing the door behind me, I felt something deep inside shift. A silent promise I didn't know how to keep. That somehow, in this wild, cruel world, I would find a way to keep them safe. Even if it cost me everything I had left.